Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Operations. I want to start off by welcoming one of our new elite members, Brittany Doman and her team at NetCon Enterprises. We appreciate your membership. We do have a special guest on today's show, but before we get to that conversation, Brian, let's start off by talking about inflation. I think you have a quick update for us.
Yeah, we won't be doing like a regular Data Monday update because with the Bureau of Labor Statistics being closed or very limited right now with the federal shutdown, the new insights or new information coming out is getting to be pretty sparse. But we did have a CPI report, Consumer Price Index inflation report last week that I thought I'd cover mainly because people have been so interested in whether or not the interest rates are going to be going up or going down. And there's an expectation that there'll be additional short-term interest rate decreases yet this year. But in watching the CPI reports, one of the major factors. The jobs report, though, I think it is not, it normally would come out this week. I don't think it's expected this week again because of the federal shutdown. But with the CPI, came in right as expected, which is a little elevated at 3%. So we talk about core inflation and headline inflation, or the all-in, including the commodities like food and fuel, both coming in at 3. They've kind of converged now, those rates. And while that is elevated, actually a little higher than it was in the high twos there for a while, but not different than expected, which tells me that probably at least one more quarter point interest rate cut is in our future. But there's been some expectations like there might be a couple cuts by the Federal Reserve yet this year. One other thing on inflation is that there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but there's goods and services is one of the split outs, and and durable goods are like tangible things you can touch goods. Those are actually in deflation territory for a little while. They've come back now and came in at annual or year-over-year rate of 1.5, and its services, which is actually a bigger part of the overall equation at 3.5%. Services still been generally coming down. Goods were down, and now we're kind of coming back up to a more normal looking type of a rate. So no surprises, which tells me we're probably looking at the same expectation at the next time the Federal Reserve Board of Directors meets, that probably looking at another quarter point rate cut.
All right, we do have a special guest joining us today, Brian. I'm going to turn it over for your conversation with Sandy Brua with the Detroit Regional Chamber.
Yeah, one of my colleagues, your counterpart at the Detroit Regional Chamber, is Sandy Brua. I worked with him for many, many years. One of the awesome things that the chamber does is quarterly polling, and they use Michigan's most accurate pollster for that. You've heard me talk before about different polls when they come out, and when it comes to Michigan-based polling and who's going to win an election here, especially elections for governor, the pollster that the Detroit Regional Chamber uses is the one that is always ahead of the curve and comes closest to predicting the outcomes, or does predict the outcomes very accurately. Sandy, thanks for joining us on the on our briefing today. And I thought that I would start out with a series of questions, or several questions that relate back to the economic conditions that exist in our state, and the way people are experiencing or perceiving them, at least. So, survey shows that voters are evenly split on Michigan's economic direction. And can you give us, first of all, what the results are, but just any insights that you can draw out of that, especially those insights that might be relevant to a business audience?
Yeah. So, Brian, first of all, I'm just delighted to be on the show and so appreciate the partnership and your leadership that you've been providing the state for several decades now, so just delighted. So the most interesting thing, we asked the question about, how you feel Michigan is doing, and we ask it in two different ways. The first way we ask it is just in general, how do you think Michigan's doing? And people can interpret that any way they want. And that number is really strong. It is a 10, 15 point lead for people who say Michigan's doing well. Now, they could be answering that question in the affirmative because we've had a really nice fall, that the Lions are doing well. You just never know what they're doing. So generally, people feel good about the state of Michigan. Now, when you dial down to your question, Brian, which is how do they feel about the economy, the picture changes rather dramatically. It's essentially a 42 to 42% split. 42% say the economy is or that Michigan's on the wrong track, and 42% say that Michigan's on the right track in terms of its economy. And that number has declined. We have seen a decline, in the last year of those. It used to be kind of a positive. More people were positive about the direction of Michigan's economy. Now we're seeing it tied.
So tied to the economy, then are recession fears, and people's behavior are oftentimes impacted by recession fears. Um, what are they reporting now, especially as it relates to you guys do regular polling?
Mhm.
How are they feeling now, and how does that relate to the past?
So inflation, and I'll get to recession, but inflation and recession are becoming very, very top fears. Obviously, inflation has been a fear and a big concern for quite some time, especially, kind of midway through the Biden administration, we had this terrible 9% inflation. People are still kind of reeling from that. But 42% of Michiganders, and again, these are statewide polls, and I appreciate you saying what you did about the Glenn Gariff group. They really do their jobs really well. 43% say that the economy is getting worse. 59% expect it to get worser. And over 30% of the respondents have delayed purchases because of the state of the economy or their fears of the state of the economy. And we think this is something that, business owners, business runners really should be paying attention to, because we do these polls, really to inform the business community across the state, so they can start gauging, okay, where are my employees, where are my customers, where are their heads at, what are they telling me about the state of the future economy, so I can kind of recalibrate my business. And so when you've got, 30% or more of respondents saying, hey, I'm delaying my purchases, that says something to the business community.
Now, before it's several topics I wanted to cover here today, but could you maybe just get a little bit of commentary um, on the way that people's political perceptions impact how they feel about the economy vis-a-vis the either right direction, wrong direction, recession, any of those economic indices. There's a pattern emerging here in that has been revealed by your polling of how much people's political views feed into how they're feeling about the economy.
Yeah, there's been a real growing change in how people view the economy, how they feel about things based on their political affiliation, really over the last decade, but really ever since COVID, it's been turbocharged. And I'll give you an example of that. Our pollster, Richard Schuba, says that it used to be how you felt about the economy really influenced how you felt about either the party in power or the man or the woman who was, leading either the state or the nation. That dynamic has now completely flipped on its head. How you feel about particularly the president is how you feel about how things are going. And I'll give you a tangible example of that. Ever since we started our polling several years ago, we've been asking the question to Michiganders, how do you feel you're doing compared to a year ago? Now, over the 5+ years that we've been doing these polls, anywhere between 72 to 76% of Michiganders have answered that question in the affirmative. They say three quarters or more I'm doing as well, if not better, than I was a year ago. What has changed is who answers in the affirmative. So when Biden was president, it was the Democrats, by and large, who had the much larger majority of people who said, "Yeah, Democrats, I feel like we're doing great." It was the Republicans who said, "Yeah, I'm not doing so great." Now that Donald Trump's in charge, and the Republicans are clearly in charge in Washington D.C., it's the Republicans who are saying, "I'm doing great." The Democrats are saying, "I'm doing terrible."
Yeah, it really is fascinating because we're talking about asking about a personal economic experience, of the way a person is experiencing the economy, and to have it so influenced on whether or not their party is in charge, or at least in the executive office, it is a fascinating turn.
We are growing increasingly tribal in the United States. It's becoming increasingly hard for people with wildly different political thoughts and opinions to, frankly, even converse with each other. And we have all built our kind of our own media bubbles. The media is much more fractured than it used to be. So if you're a conservative, you're watching Fox News or one of the other conservative outlets. If you're a liberal, you're watching MSNBC or listening to NPR. And we have these reinforcing echo chambers where our ideas are constantly being fed back to us and they're constantly being validated. So you can take the same data point, like you started this program with some hard data points. If you watch Fox News versus MSNBC, they could be talking about the same thing, but they'll have a very different spin on that, and they'll attribute it to different things. They'll have kind of different thought leadership around it. So they could be hearing the same data point, but taking away a very different opinion from that. It's fascinating.
There's so many other aspects of the poll that we could dive into. I want to get to a couple of other economic issues. So labor market, we've seen some pretty sizable, the last 2 years actually, some pretty sizable downward revisions in the new jobs numbers. And that's not unusual for there to be revisions, but the last couple of years have been downward and pretty good size compared to history. How are voters feeling about the availability of quality jobs today in Michigan?
Yeah, so Michiganders are feeling, I would say, good about it. 52% of Michiganders said yes, there are good jobs available. The problem is our last poll was just in May, right before the Mackinac Policy Conference, and that number was in the high 60s. So it's been about a 15-point drop just since the spring of people reporting that there are good jobs available. There's a whole bunch of really great data points when you dive into this. One of them is that we asked people if they know of a recent college graduate, and if so, is that recent college graduate having trouble finding a job? And over 70% of respondents who did know a recent college grad said yes, that college grad was having a hard time finding a job. And that's a pretty stunning number. I mean, that's over three quarters. Another really interesting stat in here is that when you ask people, are you concerned about losing your job? And over the last several years, Michiganders have been giving great numbers on that, very low. It's up a little bit in this poll to about 13%. 13% say, okay, yeah, I'm kind of concerned about losing my job. If you ask automotive households, in other words, someone who picked up the phone and lived in a household that had at least one member of that household employed somewhere in the automotive industry. It could be manufacturing, it could be R&D, it could be engineering, it could be anything, right? It could be sales, working for a dealership, whatever. That number jumps up to 33%. So automotive households are definitely concerned, and that's driven primarily by tariffs and trade policy and the uncertainty there. The last data point I'll share, again, there's lots of great data in here, is that of those who were concerned about losing their job, the 13% I just referred to, actually more college graduates were concerned about losing their jobs than non-college graduates. And I would love to figure out what dynamic is going on there, because their unemployment rate for college graduates is significantly lower than non-college graduates. So fascinating data point there.
Yeah, no, right. Kind of opposite of what it would normally be.
Hmm.
So you mentioned tariffs and definitely more at stake here in Michigan with respect to tariffs and trade policy. And it's been a lot of back and forth, on again, off again. But where have voters landed on their opinions on tariffs, especially as in terms of their impact on Michigan's economy?
Yeah, well, Austin Goolsbee, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, says that Michigan is the number one state at risk with this trade war. So it is definitely a big deal. So, but to answer your question, Brian, 51% of Michiganders oppose the White House's trade policy, 41% support it. That is another significant change from our May poll. In May poll, it was almost 50-50. So now we're seeing a lot more opposition to the tariffs. When you ask specifically about our trading partners and neighbors and friends in Canada, 57% specifically oppose tariffs in Canada. And the bonds between Michiganders and Canadians has not been diminished. 79% of Michiganders say that Canada is a friend, they're an economic friend, and tariffs against them are not a good idea.
And we're about to open up a brand new bridge heading over to Canada. Be able to ride your bike over there.
Yeah, and I wonder who we have to thank for that. And that's obviously you and your partner in crime, Rick Snyder. You guys did yeoman's work getting that done. That certainly wasn't easy. So, thanks to you guys.
Yeah, pretty incredible to see that. To see it like I remember the artist renderings, and usually those artist rendering pictures look nothing like the final project, and this one does. It looks just like it
Yeah.
was drawn in the beginning, which is pretty cool.
It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. I'm excited. I think it opens up next spring, I think is the updated date. So I'm okay.
Let's finish up on actually there's a different one I might want to, if we have a little time here, might run a spring on you here at the end that noticed in your poll. But well, let's talk about artificial intelligence. You guys are always on the cutting edge of the questions that you ask, and obviously a lot goes into deciding what questions are asked. So people are excited about artificial intelligence, but also pretty concerned to hear just the way that the society is talking about it. Um, with job losses associated with it. What did your polling reveal about how people are thinking about artificial intelligence?
Well, Michiganders are probably not as excited about AI as Michigan businesses are. About 50% report just not using it at all. 40% say it's not really going to have an impact, and I think that's a troubling sign if Michiganders at large do not think that AI is going to have an outsized impact on, how we work, what kind of jobs that are out there, what kind of efficiencies we're going to gain. So that was a troubling number. The interesting thing is, Brian, you asked the question about, how politics impacts how you view things. AI is another one of these examples. There's a very clear kind of profile of who's using AI in Michigan. You're primarily Democratic, you're primarily higher income, and you're primarily younger. And there's a clear profile of who's not using AI, and it's primarily Republican, older, lower income. It is, I mean, the numbers are just like it's like, two sides of a coin.
Wow, incredible. Yeah, crosstabs give you so much insight into how people are lining up and so many different things. You mind if I ask about the gubernatorial? You guys also ask about the gubernatorial contest. It's still quite a ways away. but it seemed like some movement was starting to happen in here. Anywhere, if you're across anywhere across the state, um, it seems like you can't escape seeing a Mike Duggan billboard. But it appears, at least with respect to ID, that it's starting to sink in.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Duggan's challenge is certainly getting his name known and himself known, on the western side of the state, mid Michigan, UP, basically outside the 10 counties in southeast Michigan, where he's very well known and frankly very, very well liked. I mean, he'll clean up southeast Michigan. The question is, can he, make enough progress in other parts of the state? Where other candidates are a little bit better known. I mean, certainly John James, I think, is better known in West Michigan. I think so is Tom Leonard. Jocelyn Benson obviously has been a statewide elected official for quite some time, so I suspect her name ID numbers are pretty high as well too. But if he can overcome that, I think he's got an excellent, excellent shot of being Michigan's first independent governor.
Yeah, it really, my impression in looking at your poll was that this is likely to be a horse race, like a three-way horse race. I mean, it really looks like it could turn out that way. Sandy, thank you so much for joining with us today. This is great insights. Thank you that Detroit Regional Chamber does this regular polling to provide and pull out these insights. I know it's really expensive, and and when you work for a nonprofit, it's hard to pull these things off, and that you guys do it consistently and have for years. Thank you for that.
Great. Brian, thank you and appreciate the partnership and the friendship. You guys have a great rest of your day and thanks for having me on.
Hey, thank you, Sandy.
All right, we are headed into a few more subjects before we say goodbye today. Brian, let's start off with we talked about this a few weeks ago. The H-1B visa cost was raised by the Trump administration to $100,000 each. And kind of surprisingly, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce filed a lawsuit challenging that decision.
Yeah, the U.S. Chamber is no stranger to lawsuits, but it was a bit of a surprise to me that they decided to file one in this case. My kind of initial reading of it was, while the fee was very high, that it was something that a lot of commentators seem to think that whoever holds the presidency does have that type of administrative power. But yet, nevertheless, it is being challenged in a lawsuit by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So um, that is underway, and we'll definitely follow that as it works its way through the process. Um, Basically, I think it's the technology sectors that are most directly impacted. Healthcare, maybe some as well, by this type of a change. And we covered all the um, kind of the arguments back and forth on this issue, and why some support and some oppose this type of a change. But it appears as though it will be the courts that have the last say on this one.
All right. In other news, GM is laying off salary employees as a kind of their latest cost cutting measure. So talk about the impacts here.
Yeah, a couple of salaried staff, or a couple hundred salaried staff, around 200, that are being laid off. And it's mostly at the tech center in Warren where these positions are. And this was a bit of a surprise because General Motors been having a great year, or at least a lot better than what you would have thought at the beginning of the year, especially last spring. And so, like, layoffs when there's when they're experiencing some success was maybe a bit of a surprise. But it's also, we're in a rising cost environment and rapidly changing technology. And of course, the automotive industry is no stranger to um, reducing reducing headcount when there's technologies that can replace it. So in that sense, I guess it shouldn't be that big of a surprise. But yet another sign that we are at a time of change. I mean, the and technology changes are probably going to speed up the rate at which these sorts of things happen. These types of people, by the way, that are getting laid off, they're not the easiest people to find. And so what that would say is that what that tells me is not inside information, but what it tells me is that likely General Motors is very confident that they are not going to need these disciplines in the future like they did in the past. And that would tell me it's cost cutting, yeah, but it's also probably technology.
All right. Well, finally today, consumer sentiment. A new report says it's low. So what's the story here?
When you read about consumer sentiment, there's different organizations that do surveys that are the surveys that are like the official national statistics. It happens to be that U of M does the consumer sentiment surveys, and I was looking at the readings. They had actually fallen pretty low last May, and they had recovered some, and but now have fallen to levels not quite as low as May, but pretty close. And in May they were really quite low. So um, these are this one of those stats where we are really talking about how people are feeling, how consumers are feeling, what is their sentiment about the economy. And the reason that I report these every month when they come out, when people's sentiments about the economy falter, their habits, they tend to become more conservative in their spending habits. And sometimes it can be an expectation that there's going to be a recession can be almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I just think it's an important metric to look at, and that consumer sentiment weakening um, in the Americans' view on the strength of the economy is just something that I think we probably will keep a close eye on, especially at this time when there's not likely to be a jobs report here real soon. And even when those jobs reports do start when it comes back online, I do worry that they're not going to be reliable for a while, because those are based on surveys too. And so probably will based on a small amount of information. So sentiment is going to be one of the stronger indicators that we have here for a little while.
All right. Before we say goodbye today, a quick reminder that we do have two of our Road to 2026 gubernatorial conversations coming up. Tomorrow here in Lansing, we'll have Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. And then next Monday in West Bloomfield, we'll talk with Senator Eric Nesbitt. We're presenting these in partnership with the Michigan Black Business Alliance. So if you're interested in attending one or both, you can email us sbam@sbam.org or visit sbam.org/events. We do hope you have a great week, and we will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Hey, thanks everybody. See you next week.